Okay, let's do this thing. Okay, so the background on this, I'm Kat, by the way. I'm Kat Swetel. I am an engineering manager at Verica. It's chaos engineering and continuous verification, and I'll send you a book if you want it. Anyway, how this talk came to be, there were just things that irritated me about Wardley mapping, and so now they're a talk. So that's what you're going to hear today. And also, I'm located in Phoenix, Arizona. So just my whole aura is stress right now because we're like just up to our eyeballs in COVID-19 here. Yeah, so this should be super fun to have a stressed out pandemic speaker. Okay, let's do this. First thing in this listicle, the first thing that I wish people knew about Wordly maps is that it's okay if you throw them in the trash. And I think that's the hesitation that a lot of people have for building their first map is like, oh, I need it to be this beautiful thing. We go to conferences and you see beautiful maps, all of these things. Every map that I create, I start from the assumption that it will end up in a trash can in the very near future. And that, lowers my inhibitions, right? So I'm not afraid to put things in the wrong place or whatever the case may be. Like I'm just going through this process in order to get ideas out of my head. I've noticed that this attitude also makes me more open in the future to being wrong and changing things. And I think in general, even when this is a collaborative process, like it definitely should be, if you start out working under the assumption that this is not a permanent thing, it's not going to become part of some slide deck that gets turned into a PDF and distributed to everyone and never changes. But this is really just a conversation and a process made material, and it's an artifact that is produced as kind of a byproduct of that, and we should be fine with throwing them in the trash. So I will give you some real life examples of this. Here are a couple maps that my mom and I made, and one of them is literally on a piece of trash, and the other one is on a piece of paper that had like a cup of coffee spilled on it. But when you are working under that assumption, you don't get so attached to the artifact, right? So everyone go make a map and throw it directly into the trash can. Another thing that is sort of idea of be ready to throw all your maps in the trash. Something that I like to do is put like a best buy or an expiration date on the map. So sometimes we create these artifacts and we email it to someone and it's forwarded to someone else and all of these things. You don't know who has it or anything like that. So I'll just put a like freshness date on it or something like that. You could tell, look at how dedicated I am to this talk that I took a picture of my milk that goes bad today. Anyway, I like to just put an expiration date on there so that people recognize that we anticipate certain things changing. Like, you have some big deal closing, or that budgets happened at a certain time. And I think it's really good to call out those expectations, especially around time, and just make that part of the math and say, if you're looking at this after this time, it's probably time for a follow-up conversation. Oh man, you all in the comments, I'm loving it. Okay, so I should also mention that these are working from like my least spiciest opinion to my most spiciest opinion. So this one is like a nice one that we can all be like, yeah, throw them in the trash, put an expiration date on it, and they'll just get worse from there. Okay, you will notice that in the explanation of that, of throw it in the trash, my first thing in my little listicle, I said Wardley mapping and Wardley maps, and I meant different things by them, and I think they are different. So Wardley mapping is an activity that you engage in, if you were just in the battle camp session, right? Like there are skills that you need to bring to the table. It works best if you understand certain things about your context, if you understand certain things that are kind of principles that are true in general, right? And so we come to the table and we engage in this activity, and that process is Wardley mapping. A Wardley map, I think, is the artifact that comes as a byproduct of that activity that we engage in. And the thing that irritates me a lot is that people fixate on the Wardley map and kind of minimize the importance of the Wardley mapping. And I think it should be the other way around. So the Wardley mapping should be really important, and building those skills in people is really important. Building that lexicon is really important. And the Wardley map is just like a useful actual material tool that we have. And I just don't want people to think that you draw this thing and you're all good, even without like the understanding of doctrine and without talking about pioneers, settlers, town planners, and how that's going to affect the changes that you're looking to enact, without talking about inertia and the different types of inertia and what countermeasures are for those types, and how do we examine why that inertia exists, and all of those things. Because I guess you probably could create a map without thinking of those things, but it would be useless, and it would just be a reflection of where your head's at right now without having gone through that really valuable set of activities. So I hope that we can all make a distinction between Wardley mapping and Wardley maps, because I personally have had so much luck even just adopting the language with folks and not really even creating that many maps. So that's super important to me. A little bit spicier take. Still, most of you in the comments are agreeing with me. So that tells me that I need to like push the boundary even more. The other thing that really begins to irritate me is when I think Wordly mapping can be a wonderful individual practice, but you are immersed in your own context, right? So if you're trying to map your company, you are part of your company. If you're trying to map your industry, you're part of your industry, right? So you will always have this veil, and that's also you're mapping it from your specific point of view. So whatever your background is, the school that you went to, how you grew up, what kind of household you grew up in, your socioeconomic background, all of these things, that's what you bring to the table when you make a map. So if you're trying to anticipate what's going to happen next, or create an option set and consider those options, are you going to be able to create a really rich option set and be able to weigh each of those options? Or is it going to be best if you invite a bunch of other people with diverse perspectives to weigh in on that? So I think this really applies if you are a person who has a lot of privilege. Are you going to be able to anticipate how things could be disrupted? So if you are a person operating from a place of privilege, that means that you are benefiting from current power structures. Things that are disruptive can disrupt those current power structures. So if you are looking for the source of disruption, you should probably be showing your maps and inviting ideas from people who are being very poorly served by the current system. And I know Simon earlier today, I mean, he always brings this up, right? The examples, Blockbuster and Kodak. Kodak invented the digital camera. What is happening? Where is Kodak? I guess I should take that back, because apparently they just got a big contract from Donald Trump and the US government. But anyway, these companies, right, they are benefiting from the way that the industry is currently constructed, and so they're unable to anticipate how it could be disruptive. If you go to people who are not currently being well served by whatever the structure or the existing systems are, they will tell you where the opportunities are for people, more people, to be better served by a system. And so once you make a map, or when you're making a map, you need to invite other people to participate in that with you, and you need to invite people that have a different perspective than you do. If you are sitting there with 8 people that are largely the same as you, you're not going to see like a bunch of iteration on that map. That's just not a thing. Sorry. All right. Moving right along. The takes just get hotter and hotter. Okay, so my next one is that ugly is good. And someone said this in the comment that sometimes it's good to spill your mug of coffee on your map. It absolutely is. The more unfinished a map looks, the more it invites people to enter the conversation. And so especially right now when all of us are remote, we're doing a lot of things because schedules are a mess, we're doing things asynchronously, right? So I see a lot of people making maps using online tools, digital tools. That's wonderful, right? Because you can also see the history, see how these things evolved in a lot of cases. Really cool, creates a really rich experience. But if you create a beautiful thing and then you send it out to everyone and you say, oh, please go ahead and weigh in on that. No, the thing already looks finished. People are only going to feel bought in on that process if you present something that is hideous, where they feel obligated to weigh in, because whatever you created is ugly and terrible. So they feel not even just a desire, but a sense of obligation to help you out because the thing that you created is so hideous. And as you can see, I really believe in this. And so I've created some truly hideous maps, but this really opens the door for people to participate. There's a bunch of these. They're so bad because it started out as my friend and I drinking wine on the floor, drawing these maps, bad combination. And then other people walking by are like, oh, what do you got going on? No, that should be over here. Those things don't move together. This, right? Because it looks like you need help. And I think that's great. It's an imitation. So I try to create these things that are really unfinished looking and then circulate them instead of circulating this beautiful artifact. And sometimes in like a digital medium, you have to work really hard at that to make them hideous. Yes. Wine is not tip number 8, but maybe it should be because we did some good work that weekend. Anyway, this one, I hope Simon is not in the audience. It's pretty late UK time, so I hope that he is asleep because he probably wouldn't like this. But I don't like it when people talk about inertia as being this terrible, bad thing. Inertia is bad, and you have to always try to overcome it. No, inertia just is. It's like gravity. It's just a force out there in the world. And sometimes it's good and sometimes it's bad. Inertia can be, I guess, an organizational immune system of sorts, where it prevents you from engaging things that could, in activities widely that could be dangerous to your core business. It can protect the organization from like frenetic thrashing of goals or technologies, right? I don't know if any of you have had the experience of working at a startup and also working at a large enterprise, but the smaller the organization, the easier it is, right, to move between technologies or change this or that. And when it's really easy to do those things, it's not always necessary to clearly articulate why you're doing those things. So you can get some really wide swings or thrashing in direction or tools or whatever the case may be. But in a larger organization, there's all of this momentum built behind the way things are. And so that can force people to articulate a good reason for changing those things. So I don't think that inertia is always bad. It's just a force like anything else. And sometimes you need to engage in some sort of countermeasures. But before you do that, I think it's an excellent idea to just say, why are we coming up against this force? Why are we coming up against this inertia? What is that inertia trying to protect? And if it's something with a declining value, then I think, okay, go ahead, bust it up, right? But if it's something that gives you pause, that you think, wow, I think whatever that is does have value, and that value is going to persist into the future, then perhaps you want to reevaluate what you're trying to change. Yes, so anyway, hope you're not out there, Simon. Moving right along. For my spiciest take today, we make these maps, and mostly I see people just use like little dots and then lines connecting them. And I don't see a lot of mappers depicting the human beings that are part of these socio-technical ecosystems in their maps. And I think that could be potentially dangerous. So we talk about things that are human, but we don't always depict those humans. So I can't remember when this was. I'm on COVID time. I don't know, 1 or 800 months ago. I was speaking at the Open Security Summit, and I went to one of Simon's sessions, and people were talking about botnets and how bots are influencing social networks and then influencing policy and all of these things. But I think what we need to acknowledge there is that things like bots are made to seem similar enough to a human being where they could affect the human being and cause that human being to consider a certain set of actions, right? Then human beings, if that strategy that the bots are engaging in is successful, human beings then take that strategy up a notch, right? Because we're creative, we can do that. And then where do we ultimately end up? So we created technology that was supposed to seem similar enough to human behavior that it would influence human behavior. And then human behavior one-ups the technology and is now acting back on the technology, because now the technology has to change in order to seem more human. So if the bots are becoming more human and the humans are becoming more bot, where do we end up? I suppose is my question. I think that we are always in danger of ending up at this point that is a crystallization of our culture. So with each move that we make, and we are talking about making all of these different moves, very exciting. With each move that we make within a socio-technical ecosystem, I think we must consider what happens to the people who make that move, make that change, when the system then, so they act on the system, when the system then acts on them, what will we see? And so I don't know how we do this realistically, like how do we visually depict this on a map, but how can we encourage ourselves and the whole mapping community to consider the fact that we are humans in a system acting on the system, and the system is also acting on us, and whatever effects that could have, right? That turns into a cycle. So, yeah, I think that's how I want to end this. For me, the important thing about maps and mapping, it invites a lot of people to the table. And so it's like a very human activity, right? And I just hope that through mapping, we can create opportunities for each one of us to consider the systems that we are creating and that are creating us. So that's it. I'm Kat. I'll read the chat now so that I can see what your questions are. You can pop more in there. Oh, Barbara, hi.